it would be my somewhat unpleasant task to shift the mood from very interesting and informative narrative of Professor Singh to rather abstract conceptualization about spirituality and the message Bhagavad Gita has for us in the sense of us modern professionals. Bhagavad Gita has been interpreted in so many various ways because it contains such a rich variety of ideas. It has been interpreted by philosophers, saints, by social activists, by Mahatma Gandhi, by Sri Aurobindo, a wide variety of people. They drew inspiration from Bhagavad Gita. And one of the very unusual kinds of person who derived inspiration from Bhagavad Gita was Oppenheimer, father of atom bomb. When the atom bomb was used, he realized the rather disgusting nature of this power and very strongly, actively urged that we should not promote hydrogen bomb. He was considered a security risk and removed from all the American establishment connected with atomic weapon development program. Later on, during the period of McCarthyism, he was tried for un-American activities. And he writes somewhere that during those periods when I was in great stress, the only solace I could derive was from Bhagavad Gita. So naturally, it's a very complex kind of situation where so many diverse kinds of people derive their inspiration from Gita. We have to understand the whole this message of Gita in the light of the theme of this seminar, and that is global crisis, global management crisis. In fact, it's a global crisis. That crisis is manifesting itself in so many ways, as Professor Singh pointed out in his earlier lecture. I would put it that instead of looking at these crises in terms of the limited framework in which they are defined, political, economic, energy crisis, population crisis, economic crisis, etc., it will be better to look at the more fundamental aspect of why this crisis is. In my view, the nature of this crisis is actually human crisis, civilizational and cultural crisis created mainly by modernity. And therefore, the key points which I would like to present, as I understand the nature of this crisis, is that 2 points. One is the worldview of modernity is rather narrow. It is materialistic, it is limited aspect. It takes only economic, social and political aspect of life into account. It even views man only in those terms, its usefulness to the system focused worldview, not human focused worldview. And the second problem which appears to me is a lack of concern for ethical, spiritual and human values. All these systems are designed for efficiency, for meeting the goal objectives specified usually in quantitative terms. And somehow it is taken that if you achieve that GDP, then human well-being and social well-being would be assured. That assumption seems to be very, very tenuous, and in fact it has failed. And the ill consequences of this view of life is mechanization and routinization of life. I would call it dehumanization of life. By the economic system, by the political system, by the all kinds of system we indulge in, person is looked upon basically as an instrument for advancing the goals of that system rather than the system's addressed to advancing the goals of the human persons. And because of that, so many dehumanizing ideologies have become fashionable. like individualism, nationalist, narrow, aggressive nationalism, technocentrism, militarism, etc. These are all because of the limited view, rather I will say selfish and egoistic view of life and reality. And the second point, and the third point is irresponsible management of Earth's resources and powers of modern science and technology. All the problems we are conscious of, the environmental problem, the crisis of polluted life support system on Earth, exhaustion of resources, natural resources. We are not concerned about what kind of thing we are leaving behind for posterity, what our coming generations, what kind of Earth we are leaving behind, what kind of, how they will fulfill their even minimum requirements of life. And therefore, a number of thinkers today say that this is so very inevitable now that the only question to be discussed is whether the world will end with a bang or with a whimper. So that kind of crisis requires, I'll just give two quotes from very modern and serious commentators on modernity, particularly the Western modernity, models of modernity. One is Mumford, a very thoughtful humanist. He was active in so many areas. He says, all our grandiose plans for development come to a naught because they are in hands of people who have not undergone any ethical and spiritual growth. I think it's a very significant remark he makes, where he shifts the focus on the persons who are managing this whole technology and whole enterprise of modernity, and their makeup, their worldview, their life view, and their inner growth perspectives. And the second was, of course, the management guru Peter Drucker. In one of his books on the new realities, he writes about the spiritual agonies and moral horrors, the tyranny and brutal lust for power, the terror and cruelty, the naked cynicism that have engulfed the world since the West's descent into the First World War. And then he says, I will not talk about these in my book because these requires understanding of the worldview, life view, of the spiritual kinds of understandings, the values of life, for which I neither have authority nor competence. So he says, I will be talking only about the surface things like economics, the social system, the political system, the crisis of management, etc. So in this scenario, let us see what is the inspiration or what is the wisdom which the Indian spiritual tradition, life, and the Indian spiritual understanding of life and reality. Now in my view, there are two main areas of focus in Gita. One is a holistic, presenting a holistic spiritual worldview and spiritual view of life, which is of course common with all other spiritual literature in India. And the second and a very unique contribution is that it provides a meaningful and responsible engagement with life, concepts, principles for engagement with life in a responsible manner. Engagement in life in all its aspects, its problems, its duties, obligations, challenges. And that is how I look upon the idea, the concept of Karma Yoga as a responsible engagement, as a set of principles for guiding responsible and meaningful engagement with life. The other contribution, of course, is that of the spiritual, holistic spiritual tradition of India. There are two main streams in Indian thought. One is the Vedantic tradition and another the Buddhist tradition. There is a significant metaphysical difference between the two. The Vedantic tradition postulates that all things existing in the world are created and constituted by Atman, the supreme reality which is pervading in everything and everything is a part of it. Permanence of an eternal, omniscient Atman or Paramatman. The two terms are interchangeably used. The other is the Buddhist tradition, which doesn't accept this. It is called the Anatma tradition. But surprisingly, the worldview which both give out is same. That everything in the world, every occurrence in the world, every person in the world, they are all interrelated and interdependent. I think if you present this holistic view in these terms, this very well matches with the modern ecological concepts and the modern concepts of the earth as one whole system, not as fragmented into different parts. I'll call it the holistic worldview. What would be its implications in practice? What would be its implications in developing systems, usable systems and practices is not under consideration here. Second thing is this Karma Yoga. The right way, if everything and everybody are interconnected, then the good of one is embedded in the good of all. Every action by every individual affects the whole. And therefore, the only sensible way to live is to live it on the values of compassion, concern for all, care for all, love for all, and a sense of egolessness. Realizing that cutting yourself off from this total existence, your worth, significance, in fact, loses its meaning. And not only that, theoretically, it doesn't exist. So these are the 3 or 4 significant insights. And therefore, before we talk about practicing these values, unless our worldview and our life view has changed, unless we define our goals of life as not merely gaining materialistic benefits, advancements, or egoistic needs of recognition, fame, money, etc., our ability to appreciate and to practice these values would be very, very severely hampered. And hence, touching upon the inner understanding of man about the nature of things around him and the nature of his own self is an essential need for practice of these values. Now I'll spend a few minutes on the idea of Karma Yoga. To me, it has, as I made out, it's a perception of how to, principles for responsible and meaningful engagement with life, its activities, its various spheres and endeavors. Now, the actual act of engagement is karma. It includes action, work, strivings, seeking, goal seeking. Everything is included in this overall term, and the principles for engaging it, that's a separate one. The actual engagement, how it is to be done, and the principles. And that principle in the Indian tradition is called dharma. Very much different from religion. Religion is concerned about faith, belief, nature of God, man's relationship with God, obeying God's commandments, etc. Whereas dharma is about fulfilling duties, obligations, and generating general principles. Dharma in India doesn't give specific guidelines or codes for living and doing, only general principles which are subject to interpretation, which change with Desh and Kal. Then you decide what is the dharma in a specific tradition. Spirituality also, there are 2 versions of spirituality. One may be called secular spirituality, which is becoming more popular today, and one is the theistic spirituality. Hinduism has evolved out of the theistic tradition of, but the world views remain same, the values remain same. Now, in the Karma Yoga, a few points are discussed. One is, what should be the goal of this karma? The overarching goal or the far goal of human strivings. And one key term is Loka Sangraha. That is preservation and nurturance of the holistic world order. That includes the human order, the social order, the political order, all those orders, the natural order, the non-human species order, the material order, the whole of the existence. It's especially so to think of it now, because that order is being threatened by human action as it was never before. Because man has so much of power at his command that he can affect this world order, and hence the need for focusing back on this, that one of the fundamental and the overarching goal of any activity, whether it is organizational or individual, is to see that the wholeness of this totality is not damaged. Rather, it is furthered. In this perception, Indian perception, pursuit of material goals like earth and Kam, I think Kam is specifically recognized as one of the valid goals of life as a Purusharth. Not only valid, it ought to be pursued. Other goals cannot be pursued till these are adequately addressed to. But the conditions are that the way these pursuits are carried out, the desires are fulfilled, must be in accordance with Dharma. That is, the general principles laid down. One of them, fundamental ones, will be your pursuit of pleasure should not inflict pain on others. And that others include the whole of the material world and natural world, nature, as well as the human persons. And in a way that it doesn't make you so much attached to these pursuits that your higher human and spiritual growth are retarded. Some of the key shlokas, I will refrain from narrating them because perhaps most of us do not understand them. The next point is attitude to karma. What should be our attitude in engaging with these life tasks? Number 2 points only I will mention. Do not desist from action. Do not run away from life. Don't indulge into inaction. What ought to be done, what is the right thing, must be done. We should remember that Gita is a message given to the greatest warrior on the one side when he felt emotionally upset and decided that I will not fight the war just when the war was about to commence. So it's a challenge to activity, perform your activity. But in what way? The 2 key points are, do not claim the credit for the results. Because in fact, any activity, if you look around, even an ordinary activity, I'm speaking here because so much of facilities have been provided to me. I have been able to prepare myself in a particular way. I have acquired a way of looking because of looking at so many ideas, so many things, etc. And therefore to say that what I am presenting is mine is a very, very diminutive kind of a claim and a dubious claim. Of course, it doesn't mean disowning the consequences. If something goes wrong, I cannot say, I am not responsible. So disowning and not being aware of what will be the consequences, not judging them is certainly not the part of it, but not getting fluffed up in success and being shattered in failures, which are bound to be there. That is what it means, that it is not, don't claim responsibility for it. Do not hanker after the results. Usually the goal motivation is, how will it benefit me? A very common saying in all our organizational interactions is, इसमें मेरा क्या फायदा होगा? What do I gain out of it? You do only that which you gain out of it. And those gains are all materialistic defined goals. They are not reflected from this higher understanding of life and reality and a spiritual worldview. Mahatma Gandhi, I'll read out the way he defined this shloka karmanveva adhikaraste. He says, there should be no selfish purpose behind our actions. And to be detached from fruits of the action is not to be ignorant of them or disown them. To be detached is never to abandon action because the contemplated results may not follow. This is exactly the meaning of this shloka. The other shloka is Yogastha Kuru Karmani, which makes 3 points. One is act without attachment, personal, emotional, egoistic attachments. Secondly, be even-minded in success and failure, the word sthita pragya as you mentioned. And third point, that evenness of mind is yoga. To practice that inner poise of not allowing oneself to be disturbed by the external turbulences requires practice. That is what the purpose of sadhana is all about. And when you achieve that skill and discipline of mind, so that this is perhaps the highest skill to be acquired in context of action or karma, it gives you the capacity for excellence in any field of endeavor. Yoga karmasu kaushalam. I would like to interpret it this way in terms of our present day situations. And to be able to acquire that, you require 2 or 3 qualities to be developed in the person. It is not merely by reading Gita or by listening to exhortations that you develop it. That requires effort, constant sadhana. One of them is, of course, internal purity or chitta shuddhi. Any growth in any direction, human growth, must be based on removing the impurities and putting in the positive qualities, greeds, vices, cravings, egoity, etc. These are described as the ashuddhis of chitta, which have to be removed. Then develop human abilities for wise actions and wise decisions. I think this is one of the very significant insights which I gained by reading a book from an ex-professor of IIM Calcutta, Gauranga Chattopadhyay, where he says Gita is actually a guide for critical decision making. And therefore, to make those critical decisions on which depends the fate of so many persons, of the whole world, as we are talking about, one needs to have the ability to have those wise decisions. What is a wise decision in this context? In the 18th chapter, there are 3 verses about sattvic karma, and actually translated or reinterpreted in the modern term, it will mean, first of all, examine your own motives. They should be free, pure from attachment, should not be ulterior motives behind it. Then examine the consequences to all concerned, not merely to you or to your company or your country, but the whole world. Everyone has to be examined. Examine the possible harm your actions might cause and the people to whom it will cause. And thirdly, evaluate your own capacity for undertaking the task. I think these are very practical advices which we need to give to any modern professional. So I will close by this brief understanding of my my understanding. I am presenting you my understanding of Gita as I see it, because if Gita can be interpreted in thousands of ways, I think it gives me the liberty to interpret it my way. Of course, without deviating from the essentials of it, or rather choosing what is relevant from it, what is valuable for us modern professionals engaged in so many varieties of professions, including management. Friends, with that I close. Thank you.